Sorry.
Yes, welcome to this early morning session. My name is Rolf Schröder. I'm the chair at this session. This is the first speaker. Peter Brass from Germany. He's an independent scholar, by training an engineer. And his topic is profit and utility approach of a complementary payment scheme for a complementary economy.
Thank you very much.
It's your stage.
Also from my side, good morning. What do I mean with profit and utility? Our current monetary system, euro, dollar, yen, is a profit-oriented system. Sustainability is only possible up to the point where profit expectations are not restricted. If we want to become more sustainable, we have to move in a utility-oriented system. In this case, utility orientation does not mean more profit. It means the improvement of life in our civil society. Justice, sustainability, income for everybody, such things. But our current system is invulnerable or unbeatable, so we can't change it. But we can change ourselves, and if we move into a complementary economy. And profit and utility is an approach, a theoretical approach of a payment scheme to for the movement to support the movement into complementary economy. The basic idea of this system is very, very simple: to divide the price in two parts. One part which we have to pay in the profit-oriented system, which we can't avoid, things which we have to buy, which we can't do by ourselves. And the other part, which we can do by ourselves, which we can influence. In practice, this is a complementary currency which tries to encapsulate capital. And this encapsulation of capital will be used to increase money circulation in a way to benefit society. The elements of this scheme are very well known, all of these elements. Also the vision is not new, but maybe the assembling can be promising. Probably will start locally, but the vision is that it grows up to a national scale or even a global scale. I don't want to convince someone to move into the complementary economy. This scheme will only be, I will only show the way how we could come into this movement. The good news is that this scheme allows profit. That's interesting for investors and makes it a little bit more feasible. The usual challenge, or a challenge which we have in the current profit-oriented system. We have huge assets on one side and a lack of money on the other side. This lack of money can lead or can disturb economical activities. It can even lead to a breakdown of the economy. In the orthodox money theories, this is described as a decrease of money velocity. At least it is the picture which usually the followers of Freigeld like to use. But in any way, it's a good picture, and it is really the challenge. If we ask us the question, how can we keep money in circulation? That's one of the main points. So, but first, what is complementary economy? Complementary economy is for those who want to take responsibility about our life and our environment. It should be a counterpart to globalization. It gives us opportunities for degrowth and downslowing, and life and business should become more self-determined. This self-determination has hopefully a positive effect on our environment. So economical, ecological, and social. And this payment scheme is a platform to finance and to maintaining the complementary economy. as the people needs are more or less in their surrounding, in their environment, the complementary economy is probably more a local economy, but the scheme itself can be applied, or should be, or can be applied worldwide. So, back to the idea to divide the price in two parts. In practice, this is the encapsulation of capital in a complementary monetary scheme to create a closed loop for money circulation. We want to use capital in a more sophisticated way. Encapsulation means that we distinguish between outside and inside. Outside is the profit-oriented global market with the profit-oriented legal tender. Outsiders pay with outside money. Inside is the complementary economy with the utility-oriented money, and the insider pays with inside money. Simple. The exchange should, it would be good if the exchange happens through trading of goods and services. The exchange happens if the outside money comes onto the inside account, it will be automatically exchanged. The exchange rate is 1-to-1, at least at the start up. And for sure, that's the point for this conference, we should have the transaction costs as low as possible. Means the mobile payment and blockchain and all these things. So on the right side of the picture, you see the normal transaction from the money. The money in a transaction, money goes from the bank to the buyer, from the buyer to the seller, and from the seller back to the bank. This triangle. If the seller is an insider and the money goes onto the inside account, it switches into the inside system. So, and the outside money will move into the reserves, which will hedge the system, and later on is important for the imports. So, one transaction, if we can generate one transactions in the inside system, we have one income. If the insiders are clever, to try to keep the money as long as possible inside, and to try to make as much as possible transactions. So, to be in the complementary economy, or to increase the in complementary economy. So the scheme itself is based on 3 elements. Private money for the private sector. So these are the accounts of private persons and companies. That's the money for private orientation and private interest. Second, public money for the public sector. These are the accounts of non-profit organizations and public administrations. This is the money for utility orientation, public interest. Both together are the inside system, and if we can generate money circulation, it's the stable money circuit. But the system interacts with the outside, has to interact with the outside, means we have exchange of goods and services. So we have also to make outside trading rules, or it's a kind of metabolism, like in biological cells. Stoffwechsel. So we need for this, we need purchasing rules, and this outside trading is the border or the custom. So back to the different types of money. Private money for the private sector, main function is mean of payment and unit of account, and should provide this money circulation. So it's a usual demurrage money. I think everybody of you knows what demurrage money is. It loses value over time, and you have to use it in the first period so that you are forced to use it and to keep the money in circulation. Invented by Sylvia Gesell. Something like we have heard from Chiemgauer, that is one of the schemes which using this demurrage money. Public money for the public sector. The main function of this money is store of value. So to keep the money in circulation, it must be immediately reinvested into the circular economy in the way to give loans as interest-free credits. in the first step, in the priority step, to the private sector. If the private sector is saturated, the public sector has to take lending the savings. And the main benefit, this money is without interest and demurrage, and should provide utility guarantee. In this case means utility guarantee. The value is not in the money, the value is in the public services. Yeah, for example, education, welfare, elderly welfare, security, waste collection, public traffic, and so on, and so on, and so on. So, back to the outside trading, the interaction between the outside marketers, the exchange of goods and services between inside and outside, the metabolism. The main function of the outside trading rules is to guarantee purchasing power. So, if an insider sells something onto the outside market, goods and services, the volume of the inside scheme increases. It's an export. If the insider buys something on the outside markets, goods and services, the volume of the scheme decreases. It's an import. So, what means purchasing power? So, the user of the inside money should have the same purchasing power with the inside money like with the outside money. Means free access to outside goods and services, except financial services, because these financial services would destroy the scheme. The prices of the goods and services must be competitive, but one main point is that the outside, or the rules for the outside trading should promote the inside business, and we can control this by, for example, by establishing purchasing cooperatives, or later on import traders. Import traders means that you have the right to exchange inside money back into outside money for purchasing goods and services. Okay, that's one assumption or vision how it could work. The vertical axis is the volume of the complementary money. The horizontal axis is the time. We have a start-up phases, this one. Yes, for sure the critical phases in which the most of the schemes are in the moment. Besides about success or default of a system, it would be very helpful if public sector would support the system by, for example, paying wages, as we have seen it for Wörter. First transactions lead to first income. So, if it's a suffering economy, the people need the income, and they see that the acceptance of the system increases, so it comes to more transactions, to more income, to the first savings, and to the first lending. So, if the insiders or the people realize that this system works better than the current one, the volume of the scheme increases, or the volume of the system increases to a maximum. Also the savings increase to a maximum. It comes to a saturation of lendings in the private sector. The public sector has to start to take the borrowing of savings and to invest this lendings into public infrastructure. Besides the increasing income for everybody, it is the second point, the utility, to increase the utility by public infrastructure, to improve the public infrastructure. So it comes to establish that the system establish itself. So the system itself can breathe. So it must not only increase, it can also decrease a little bit, and it will do it probably. So on the end, it has a full acceptance. Means the money runs, run more or less completely inside the system. So if the public sector pushes money into the system, it comes back immediately. And this allows us, that was the point where we want to be on the end. Yeah? This allows us, for example, to do things or to implement things like an unconditional basic income. Oh. Yeah. Okay. So, now where are the profit in the system? Yeah? If a society wants to become a system provider, it creates the standard and makes the business. Why? Because the system provider collects and manages the reserves, and this reserves gains interest in the global financial markets. And if you can collect a lot of money, you have power onto the market. That's by the way the business model of Libra and PayPal. So. So that's the part which the system provider will gain. And by the way, it's the difference between a utility-oriented system and a profit-oriented system. A utility-oriented system can breathe. It can increase or decrease without getting into crisis. But a profit-oriented system must always increase. Yeah? And it makes it difficult that this profit-oriented system, that we can be in a profit-oriented system sustainable. Yeah? So, back to the basic idea to divide the price in two parts. Yeah? So, on the left side, the bar of the cost, on the right side, the price of the product. The difference is the benefit or the profit. So, if you try to pay the costs in inside money, you have no benefits because at first you have to exchange outside money to pay the inside. But as soon as you get also inside money, you create benefits because you can pay the costs with the inside money, and you don't have to use the good money, the profit-oriented money. That's interesting for companies who want to produce cheaper. And if you're an insider and you try to get public services which have no profit or has less profit because they are usually non-profit oriented, you have to pay less as usual. So if you keep in the inside system. So implementation. So we have to create a second miracle. Miracle is a special word, and for this we have to find a perfect community, because success leads to trust and confidence, and idea will propagate among other communities. So what does means miracle? It's an historical experiment which we know from Wörgl, where they were really relative success, where they were successful by implementing a demurrage money, which increased money circulation. But we all know that demurrage is extremely unpopular, and Wörgl had legal issues because the central bank has forbidden it. So, what means perfect community? So we have to find a suffering economy, because only people who need this income want to go into demurrage money. Because for these people it's not interesting if the money has interest or not. They want to have income. They have no income at the moment. And suffering economies can jump over this step. Okay, suffering economy. They should have a kind of social intelligence. So it means they must have the capability to understand the system. And they should not kill each other for values like mobile phones. Yeah? So, very important too, we have heard it yesterday too, the authorities should want to solve the problems of the economy. So, they should be cooperative. On the end, the community should also have a sufficient size, and local turnover should be big enough for the system provider that they can gain money. And these local crossovers should be more than the external debt and leases which this community has, because otherwise the outside system would suck out the success of the system. And on the end, there must be understanding between the system provider, thank you, system provider and the community, otherwise it can't work, so we can't understand how it works. So, and I'm on the end, call for actions. Yeah. That's up to you. If you have if we can follow up something. On the end, we want on the like there. That's my cat, and he is. I forgot the name. He's a really nice, and he is zufrieden, satisfied, and with lowest possible effort. He's satisfied with the lowest possible effort, and that's where we want to be on the end. That's it. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. I appreciate being so right on time. Congratulations for that. Questions, please.
Please.
Thank you very much for a very, very progressive idea.
Thank you very much.
You mentioned the difficulty of the demurrage. In your idea, it must be provided by the private sector, right?
Provided to the private sector. It's during in the exchange. As soon as it comes onto the counter of the private person or company, it is private money, and this private money is forced with this mandatory, with this demurrage money that we can keep it in circulation.
Okay.
Yep.
But in that case, it seems to be difficult to make more profit by the demurrating money compared to the savings money, because savings
for sure. They should make not too much money. I told that they are profit. That's a private, let us say, the free market, the freedom of the market, that people can do what they want, that they are satisfied, that they do self-determined handling. The people who are inside the system, they don't make the profit in a way to earn money. They make the profit to have income and to have a public infrastructure which they did not have had before. That's the profit, the benefits they gain. The profit is for the outside system. That's for the system provider who wants to earn the money, who has to invest into the system. If we find someone,
Okay.
probably not.
Maybe if you want to make the profit system to the demurrating,
For the system, only for the system provider, not for the inside.
okay. In that case, maybe it's better to to limit to have the savings money only the individuals, so that the company cannot have the savings money, right?
No, they have the reserves. So the money, the outside money, which exchanged into the inside system. The business model of Libra. So if we look onto that, what they want to have. If they, let us say, we would come to this last full acceptance. So they would have, we would maybe in a range of 10, 20, 100 billion dollars, something like this. So, and if you look onto the usual interest rates or the nominal interest rates you can get onto the market, the system provider gains every 10 years the double of this profit. So made out of 1 billion, in 10 years 2 billion, in 20 years 4 billion, and so on and so on. If we can get the 7% on the market. That's where the natural interest you find in all this stuff, literature. Okay?
More questions, please.
Yeah?
I have a comment, preferably.
Thank you very much, yes.
So, very nice presentation and very bright ideas in it, I found, but I didn't understand the difference between complementary economy and traditional economy.
Yeah, that's up to the insiders what they want to make out of this scheme. Yeah. So as I told before, they are able to do what they want to do, the self-determination. You don't have these possibilities in the current system because you have to run for the profit. Everybody has to run for the profit. If they don't want to run for this profit, you need to have an alternative, and this would be the alternative. If they do it, I don't know, but I assume that they have the possibility to change into sustainable system if they want. They can't do it, or that's my opinion, they can't do it in the current system. Because it needs this always this growth. You don't need this growth in the alternative system. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
So this is the contradiction between utility and profit.
Yeah, no, it's not really contradiction. I wrote in my title, profit and utility. So it allows to have both the profit for the system provider and the utility for the society. So as it runs complementary to the current economy. So the complementary economy, whatever we want to do with, to get what we want to do in a complementary economy, that's up to the society. But we have the possibility to run both complementary. So we don't, as I said in the beginning, we can't change the current system. So it's invulnerable, but we can change ourselves. So we can change something. We can make our own life in the complementary economy. That's the idea behind.
Yeah.
Yeah. Please.
What's the importance of the size of the network and of the circular supply chains in it?
Yeah, for sure. As more people join the system, as better does it work. That was on one of the last points. The size of the system. It should be a sufficient turnover the system. In the beginning, for sure, it will be small. I think about a region, something like this, Chiemgau, for example, but it's not in a suffering economy. But in the end, it's the scheme itself, as Mr. Nishiki said in the beginning, it should be possible to apply it worldwide. So if the first society is success, the other will follow, yeah? And we have a kind of growing system. And on the end, the idea, the vision is that, let us say, all transactions of poor people will be done in the system. So that's where we speak about billions. So that's the vision, for sure. Probably we will default in the start or in the startup phase at most of the systems. But the vision is that if everybody sees that it works, and that it works better than the current system, and that they don't have to work for the profit, they can work for themselves. So when they move into the system, everybody will do it, hopefully. So, and that would be the world. So, so if it jumps over a national currency, it gets a little bit more difficult, like the problems which Libra has. The exchange system makes it complex, but if we are in a blockchain, the tokens or the coins or whatever you call it, they are independent from the unit of national currency. So they can create an exchange system in the alternative scheme, like Libra. Mm-hmm.
One more question, perhaps? Or perhaps a very short summary?
Yeah, please. Thank you.
No, from your side?
So no, I have no summary. I've done the system. I hope it's interesting for you. That's it.
Okay.
And I hope I will find an investor. That would be the most interesting thing. But it don't look like this here that we come together here with some investors. It seems to be not possible. But maybe the future.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Alexander Zapko from the Slovak Republic. And he's talking about a topic toward merit economy.
So today I'm going to talk about an idea which is kind of different from what you have been hearing up until this point.
Could you speak loudly, excuse me?
Louder or higher?
Louder.
My voice? Okay, I will try. About 10 years ago, I decided to create it's another So about 10 years ago, I decided to create a cross-country portal because I moved to an area in Slovakia that I didn't know, and I couldn't find trails to go ski in the winter or to find information about snow conditions on those trails. I thought that it would be possible to create some kind of crowdsourced portal where the skiers themselves would be providing the information for the portal. So the idea worked quite well. After 10 years, we have around 40,000 visitors per season, which lasts about 5 months. But soon after launching the site, I noticed that only a small fraction of users actually provided the information for the site, which is not really uncommon in crowdsourced projects. Like, for example, Wikipedia is known that 80% of its content is provided by less than 3% of its users. So the first puzzle was this asymmetry between providers and consumers of the site content. The idea I had that could resolve this asymmetry was that maybe it's not really callousness from the side of the consumers that they were lazy, but maybe it was the fact that they had different interests than the people who provided the reports. And the same consumers on my site maybe were providers of content on different portals, and so globally maybe the system was fair, but on the local level within one portal it seemed unfair. So I thought that maybe if we had virtual kind of a volunteer currency, we could restore the fairness also on the individual project levels. The second puzzle was what actually motivates people to provide labor for public good. That led me to look into some of the theories of motivation in psychology. You might be familiar with maybe Maslow's hierarchy of needs. There is also a modern version of a modern theory of motivation called self-determination theory, which had been developed in development for 40 years. It had been thoroughly tested in lab settings, also in real world. So according to this theory, we have 3 basic needs, and they are high-level needs, which is need for autonomy, competence, and relatedness. And these needs, in turn, are the source, or desire to fulfill these needs is the source of motivation. Self-determination theory also recognizes that there are different types of motivation, with the most valuable one being intrinsic motivation. And as we decrease the level of autonomy perceived by the person, we enter the realm of extrinsically motivated people, which are less valuable. Another observation was that was made by psychologists studying motivation, and in particular intrinsic motivation, is the fact that some rewards, the different types of rewards have different effects on strength of the motivation. In particular, monetary rewards have been found surprisingly decreasing willingness to supply labor, which is in contrast with expectation of orthodox economic theory, while verbal price, non-material reward, citation indices in scientific domain have been found increasing willingness to supply labor. We can see graphically here the difference between intrinsically motivated worker, which is this solid line. You can see that such person supplies labor without any reward. And with suitably chosen reward, as I mentioned, non-material reward, the willingness to supply labor is growing. Whereas the extrinsically motivated worker would not work without reward. This is that basically what the orthodox economic system or theory expects. So we can make two inferences out of these observations. One inference is that a work reward has two functions. One is the familiar one. It can be used to purchase goods and services. The second one is psychologically motivating. That's what we saw in intrinsically motivated people, that they respond to verbal and non-material reward with increased effort. That I call the merit function of the reward. And the second inference we can make is that it is actually the merit reward which is motivating people to supply labor, which is surprising. We can see that it is true for the intrinsically motivated workers. For extrinsically motivated workers, it's also true to a great degree, and I have more evidence for this claim in the paper. I'm not going to go into details because it is not really that important for the point I want to make. So, what would be the advantage of splitting these two functions into two separate rewards? We could think about an economic system which would implement this kind of reward mechanism, and we can postulate some rules for that system. First, every hour of a labor would be rewarded with a flat reward, just like in time banking. Second, the products or services could be sold for any price that market can bear. That's different from time banking. Third, the purchase would be made not to the seller, but to the system. And system in turn would split. That's where the magic happens. The system would split the reward into those two portions, that exchange value and signaling one. It would destroy the currency at that point, but it would reward the worker with the psychologically salient signaling reward, the merit reward. So these are the basic rules which a merit economy would have. And additional rules could be added by a particular implementations of merit economy. So, for example, particular implementation I have developed allows any type of work to be rewarded, so there is no no list of jobs that can be rewarded. The currency can be exchanged on free market freely by people within the economy creating products that are wanted from the outside, so they can be purchased at a market-determined exchange rate. So what are the benefits of this system? There are quite a few of them. I believe that the most important one is that it is unlike capitalist remuneration mechanism. It separates these two concerns, that exchange value and psychologically signaling one, into two rewards, whereas in capitalist remuneration, they are granted together. So people are desiring the merit reward, but they necessarily get also the exchange reward, which means that the income inequality is growing. That's what I consider to be the main source of income inequality. So in merit economy, these concerns are separate. Exchange value is granted by hourly wage, on the hourly basis. It means that there's only 24 hours a day, so there's an upper limit. Everybody works more or less the same number of hours, so we have basic economic equality. But at the same time, the system is as dynamic as the capitalist system, because the merit portion, the merit function is carried in a separate non-material reward. So this idea was tested briefly last 2 years ago on my portal in a 5 months long experiment. The reporters, the content providers, were rewarded by points. They got 20 points for report. Other types of report work were also rewarded with points. The creators could mark their content as community content, which means that the content could be accessed by other people only with points. And there were also two, it was possible also to purchase points for euros, and there were available also two kinds of merit reward, star rating and count of views of individual reports. The results were quite encouraging. This is the experimental season here. This is logarithmic axis, so this doesn't look that dramatic, but we had around 1,000 participants, out of them 360 active. It means that those 360 people either earned their points or purchased for euros. We had numbers of reports, regions, and users doubled. 130 people purchased points for around 600 euros during that period of time. What was important, I think, is that the workers the users who supplied reports before the experiment continued to do so also during the experiment, and they continued to do it also after the experiment ended. Whereas so we can infer that the additional, the increase in number of reporters came from different type of users. They were not intrinsically motivated. They were motivated by some different factor, most likely by the fact that they couldn't access the content, so they were forced to either purchase the points or earn them. Or there could be also a factor of relatedness seeking, because it was community content and people want to be part of the community, so that could have been another reason. So in the summary, I think the most important thing to remember is that a work reward has two functions, exchange value and signaling, merit signaling. The second one is more important. If we create economy that implements these two functions separately, we can achieve certain interesting effects, which I mentioned before. If you want to learn more about this idea, we can read my paper. You can visit the actual implementation. It already is coded. You can see it on that link. There is also an API for the engine, economic engine, that can be used in different projects, both online and offline. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander. Questions, please. Will I start? I have one question. Would it not be better to apply a rule of non-convertibility in this context? You have convertibility, the possibility of convertibility to, well, to the established capitalist systems of this merit currency. Did I understand that correctly, or?
Well, there is a currency, which is just like money as we know it. And you can exchange it with national currencies.
Yes.
And your question is?
Does it make sense? Is it not better to maintain this sector separately?
No, yeah.
Does it not dilute somehow the specific character of this national currency?
Well, I'm not sure whether I understand, but there's a advantage of having a community currency in the system, because this particular implementation rewards any kind of work, which the regular economy doesn't. So you need a community currency to carry that function of being able to reward somebody for any type of work. So I'm not sure, did I answer your question?
Yes, yes. But I doubt whether it's the
merit,
best solution for the...
The merit reward, that's non-material. It's just a score.
Yeah.
Just position in a hierarchy. You know, it tells you how well are you doing. Just like a citation index in the scientific domain. You know how many times your work has been cited. Yeah. Or in capitalism, how high is your salary? That's basically what people respond to. You know, they compare themselves against other people, how much, depending on how much they earn. So this is the function, the signaling function, which is separate from the exchange value function.
Thank you. Proceed, sir.
Yeah. And is this term, merit economy, is yours, or is based on some theory? And is there any connection with the moral sentiments of the theory of moral sentiments of Adam Smith?
The first question is negative, and the second question is positive.
Yeah.
I mean, the first question, I coined that term. It is my invention. But yes, Adam Smith talked about the same thing, more or less. He talked about role of status, how people, all of the economic activities are really directed at gaining more status. That's what the theory of moral sentiments is about, if I understand it correctly.
Yes, please.
There are other theories like that from anthropologists. I don't know if you know it. For example, Dominic Campbell or Claude Lévi-Strauss.
I heard about him, yes. I have not read.
They talk about the economy of prestige. But they study, they research in indigenous people, most of Latin America, in the Andean area.
Yeah. I heard about
I-
prestige items and
Yes.
cooler rings and all this stuff. Yeah.
I find some similarities.
Similarities,
Similarities. The essential is that they look for non-material reward.
Right.
That's the important thing.
Right.
But of course, that was in an indigenous context, so the people knew each other very well.
Mhm.
And here, well, you are talking about internet.
Exactly. It's
relations
like on a
of
global
internet
level.
In a global level.
Right. Right.
But I think that can be interesting to compare these two.
I actually do that. In the paper, I have a section about hunters-gatherers, which is close to what you are talking about. And I claim that this is actually first implementation of the merit economy. So maybe you want to read that.
Okay.
Maybe I didn't hear it. Can other users see how many points I have? Like, because you
Yes,
said,
that's a good question.
because like
It's totally open. Everybody can see everybody's both scores, the merit score as well as the how much money they have, which is unusual. But in the volunteer domain, it is actually an asset, I think.
Can they influence if they see the other one gets more for the same work? Can they struggle for it? Or?
That's a good thing.
Yeah.
Because they're trying to sell their good or service for, they either increase their effort,
Mm-hmm.
so it's a good thing.
Okay.
The transparency actually solves lots of problems.
Okay.
More questions?
Seems like you will have lots of time to prepare.
It's your time. If you want to produce,
Let's see, I have
say
more
something
slides.
additional.
There is also a question about defections, like how many people will supply fake labor just to earn money. In the actual implementation, there are two mechanisms which should prevent this from occurring. First is that every labor has to be approved by two people. And even if he or she found friends who would approve that labor, there is a court where anybody can take anybody else to court and based on the gather support for their cause. And so there are two groups, defenders and accusers, and each of them can gather supporters, and at the 3-day period it is counted how many merits they have. I mean the merit score, total merit score, each of these groups, and who has more will win. So there is a way to deal with this. This chart shows how in public games situations people tend to lower their investment. How to say that? If we agree that we each will put 50 euros into a project that will benefit all of us, only in first round 50, people put 50 euros. In the second round, they look around and they see that other people didn't, or many people didn't, so they lower their contribution and actually goes down. So this is a common problem, but it was found that altruistic punishment solves the situation. If people are able to punish others for violating the rules, then the system is stable. It can be stable. So that's what probably I could add to this as my extra slide.
Any more comments or another question?
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, my topic is monetarism and currencies for an alternative economy, the cornerstones of complementary currency research. Some of you might wonder, because alternative economics, well, this is automatically somehow related to the topic of complementary currencies. Many authors were influenced by ideas like E.F. Schumacher's Small is Beautiful, and somehow these two things belong together. What I think is that they are drifting apart. The focus, and that's what we could see at the conference so far, is very much on money. Money, money, money. And I think that's a development which I see rather critically. This has something to do also with the fact that the rule of non-convertibility, or more precisely, strict restrictions on convertibility to complementary currencies has been diluted. Nowadays there's more talking about free convertibility, or only loose rules on convertibility of complementary currencies. There's a big exception, of course, and these are time systems. Time systems, of course, are not convertible. And if you look at the literature of time banking scholars, they hardly ever refer to monetary theories. So in a way, they stand a little bit apart from the mainstream of the thinking in terms of complementary currencies. As an introduction, I look back in my paper, I look back to the origins of alternative economics thinking back in the 1970s. One has to remember that back in the 1950s and 1960s, people had a completely different version of the economy. I quote here, to your right, a saying by Bertrand Russell, the philosopher, who wrote back already in the 1930s, that something like private cooking would be unnecessary. And that was the belief, both in the capitalist West as well in the Soviet Union and other countries of this Soviet bloc. Kitchens didn't vanish completely, but they became very, very small. And nowadays you have big kitchens. Well, Russell was perhaps not completely wrong, because many people don't use them. You see them in restaurants. But the informal economy, and that became evident in the 1970s, was becoming more important. Yeah? There was an economy beyond the official economy. And this line of thinking is also an important important for the background of the thinking of the development of complementary currencies. It's still present. We can see that certain frameworks, most important perhaps the social and solidarity economy, is an important framework for the development of complementary currencies in France. In my country, in Germany, we don't have this framework. It is discussed, but in France it has a long tradition. So that's highly important to understand why these local currencies flourish in France now. Diverse, I mentioned some other examples, the diverse economy approach by Gibson Graham, and the dual economy that needs some explanation. It's a line of thinking which developed in the 1980s, and it was the belief, the perspective, that it would be possible to establish an economy beyond the capitalist economy, consisting of elements of the informal economy, but also elements of the formal economy, a better position for those who work at the fringe of a capitalist economy. It later vanished. One of the authors, Joseph Huber, said, well, it all remained conceptual tutti frutti. It's hard to actually get a hold on it. But as I will show, this had some relevance for the development of thinking in the 1980s. In my paper, I give a brief review of the development of thinking about complementary currencies in the 1980s and 1990s, how it actually developed. And in fact, we have many writers who did not focus on monetary issues. There are some exceptions. When the LETS was presented at the TOAST summit, the other economic summits in the mid-80s in England, in London, yes, there was some talking about monetary issues, but it did not have a prominent place as it has now at a conference like this one. And in fact, there were a number of authors whose work was in the academic sector, whose work was quite influential, and they did not mention monetary issues at all. For instance, Klaus Offe and Rolf G. Heinze, according to my colleague Georgina Gomez, that's the book everybody should have read. That's how she described it. Or Colin Williams in England, that's a little bit later in the 1990s, who had a tremendous influence on the development of thinking, of theory about complementary currency. He launched the IGCCR, the journal, which we all know today. And I include my own name also in this row of writers. Monetary aspects became slowly more important when Werner Oncken, a German author, reminded people of the development of the Virgil experiment. And this was taken up by other adherents of the free economics theory, by Margaret Kennedy, and later by academic authors, by authors like Bernard Lietaer. In the Future of Money, he took that up. And slowly but surely, this became the dominant line of thinking. In the 1990s, academic scholars like Jérôme Blanc and Peter North, they also focused more on money. So slowly and surely, it changed. But in the beginning, things were a little bit different. And I think it's worthwhile to actually look back at this theoretical framework of alternative economics. In my own work, in my own book, I discovered this issue back in the 86, 87, when I started thinking about these issues. I was influenced by this line of thinking of a dual economy. And my question then was, what is the established economy? What is the capitalist economy? And I had embarked on a postgrad course in international studies dealing with the global economy, but it was difficult for me to get a hold on it. It was a kind of a feeling of saying, well, it's the world in a space of capitalism. That's how a German philosopher, Sloterdijk, puts it. And how to get out of it. You don't have a world state which controls the world economy, so just step it aside and think of something different. At that time, I didn't know anything about LETS and time banks, but that's how these ideas developed. And I must admit, at that time, I also worked about neoclassic economic theory, about consumption theory, and from this tradition, I adopted the difference between production and consumption. My understanding of the potential of complementary currencies was that it constituted a different level, a different distinction between production and consumption. And the crucial point was really that value levels were different. You had different value levels in these alternative local systems than in the established capitalist system. That was the crucial point in this book. And in fact, I see something similar in the work of Viviana Zillitzer later. Well, she came up with a book on qualitative differences between the various forms of money and opposed the earlier views of Simmel's view of the great homogenizing view on money. In order to say these qualitative differences between money is something I think is important quite today. I oppose the view that, for instance, barter systems or the Swiss Vier are just currencies. If you have a group of participants in such systems, they I think it forms an alternative economy already. Price levels are different. In barter, for instance, it is a possibility to say, okay, we have barter as an alternative to sales. They can sell in the rare systems, hotel rooms, for instance, in euro currency at a lower price, or alternatively, they go to the alternative market where they charge the equivalent of the normal price. But it is possible because they have a different market systems. Terms of trading are different in such an alternative systems. In order to maintain these these different value systems, it is important to understand the boundaries of the established capitalist systems. I myself, describe this as complementary currencies as finite systems, systems that operate within boundaries. And quite interestingly, Salazar, in a later writing, also developed this idea. There's a very interesting article by Salazar himself, and Tilly, the late Charles Tilly, brought in this concept of boundary theories, where they elaborated on this topic and said, well, systems have problems to develop. They develop within certain boundaries, local boundaries, and of course the boundary of non-convertibility. Perhaps as a short amendment, at that time I also, in order to describe it, I took up my experience in a German Tauschring, and I showed that it is a system. It's a Let's type of a system which has a parity to the Deutschmark at that time when I wrote this. But although it has a parity, the value of these exchanges is different. It's a time system, and if you applied opportunity costs or market prices to the trades exchanged in the systems, value levels would be different. Yeah? More important, this is quite obvious in time systems, time banking, where people render a voluntary service. I have evidence in my paper where I say, okay, somebody doing voluntary work in New York City said, I wouldn't do it for so many dollars. Yeah? I do it because it's something different. And that's important in other time banks as well, that people are not, well-off people, but they like to do it, but they wouldn't do it for money. It is the different value systems. Generally, I distinguish between the domains of connectivity and boundaries. Boundaries is the monetary aspects, but also other aspects like information about supply and demand. And the focus, I think, is always on connectivity. As you can see at the photographs, and I could show many, many other photographs, all the images of complementary currencies are about connectivity, yeah, bringing people together, photos of money. And the other thing I'm advocating, the issue of boundaries, is something which is somehow the dark side of the moon. I don't have any images for that. I tried to bring it across with some images from modern art, but it doesn't really work very well. Important boundaries are, of course, restricted convertibility, most important, territorial aspects, or alternatively you have sectoral systems. Yesterday somebody talked about bookmoj, internet platform for trading books. That would be an example. Restrictions on membership. Yeah. Swiss Vier, for instance, important system in Switzerland, restricts membership to small-scale businesses. And also important, the fourth point, systemic limits, credit and debit limits. What we can learn also from this boundary theory that it is better to have flexible drawn boundaries and yes, thank you, understand them and apply them in a more flexible manner and not too rigidly. The system explains is a way to explain various types of complementary currencies. The LATS itself is a good example to show how this model actually works. It is a system with clearly boundaries. It's non-convertible, a fixed circle of members, and a territorial limit. And the systemic limit is always a zigzag where credits and debits ideally go up and down. The classic LATS didn't work. That's sometimes not presented correctly. The classic LATS, we have empirical evidence from the 1990s from Australia, included businesses and private people. That's the way it was designed by Michael Linton, and the evidence shows it didn't work. Why? Because businesses sold more than private people. And so there was an inherent inherent imbalance between the system, and that's why it didn't work. The systems we have today, which are called LATS, or the Tauschreins, or the cell, based on the LATS concept, are usually time systems, unlike Michael Linton's design. And they work because they don't have these inherent imbalances. One has to distinguish between these two types of systems. This is important also, this distinction, because it means that a non-convertible system is outside the circuit of money, what Marx called money, capital money. So if you have just income in an exchange value, yeah, it's not useful to buy machinery, to buy a new van for a small business, for instance. Therefore, it is important to maintain the links to other elements of the alternative economy, like microfinance or common pool resources. But that's becoming more difficult if there's talking just about money. That's a problem I have in Germany within, for instance, Negro circles. Yeah, there's lots and lots of conflict where you either focus on money or you either focus on the commons. It has something also to do with the old conflict between, as Marx calls it, because left-wing people and people like us who are in the tradition of Robert Owen and other utopian writers. Of course, we speak about labor-intensive work. That's part of the value system. How is it possible to actually exchange goods and services which are labor-intensive? That's one of the explanations behind this need for exchange in on different tiers of value systems. And one could apply here the cost disease by Baumol, who shows that labor-intensive work becomes more and more expensive. And that also is also relevant for certain sectors of the alternative economy, like alternative agriculture. My contribution to this conference theme is something well, it was authored by somebody called S. Floor, but you're good prosumers. I think you already realized that the author S. Floor has something to do with Rolf S. And that was something published in 1989. It's a scenario. I think, thank you, Makoto yesterday also presented a scenario. This was also a scenario. It was a vision of an economy in the year 2029. And it is a world, that's the vision, where no scrip, no cash exists on anymore. It's just digital money. But not, of course, not Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies. It's always money in account. And it takes up, it criticizes, it's an alternative to the LATS. It provides an answer to some of the problems of the LATS system in the way that it includes also a time limit. So the idea in the scenario is that exchanges within these finite systems, within a system that operates locally, are privileged. People pay less tax. Yeah? And you can argue for that, yeah, because you have an alternative economy, not just an alternative money. And therefore members are able, because they pay less tax, also to cover the expenses of administering this system. They pay a fee, but in the end, they also gain something. And that makes it attractive for people to actually participate in such a system. It's not a blueprint. It has still many deficits, for instance, the issue of securities, but I think that's something we could also discuss. I see, and that's my conclusion, basically two paths. One is leading with fully convertible currencies into a way which I see as rather problematic. I think we should be careful to say not to enter a way which is very close to a neoliberal perspective. I see fully convertible currencies rather critical, and I think although their founders have best intentions, it implies the risk that they are door openers for neoliberal development. And I would emphasize with my contribution the potential of, if not closed systems, but systems with limited convertibility. I put a full stop here. I already extended my time. Yes. Yes, please.
Can you explain again your distinction between the classic, which I understood, the classic let's, and the modern day let's?
Yes, the classic let's, the basic idea was to involve businesses. That was the idea, and bring businesses and private people together. And the idea migrated from Comox Valley, from Canada. It was made popular at the Toast Summit, and then it became really big in New Zealand first, and then in Australia. And from Australia, we have the wonderful evidence by Mark Jackson, and he showed that things didn't work because the businesses sold and sold and sold, and the private people couldn't compensate for this. That was the disaster of a classic let's, and that's why it didn't work.
But, and then the modern day let's?
And then it continued. In Europe, also people tried to involve businesses, in Germany, for instance, or in France, but it didn't get on very well. Also due to the fiscal reasons, because they operate in different fiscal environments. Yeah, businesses have to declare this in their tax declaration. It's all very complicated, but the fundamental difference is this systemic difference. And therefore we have now a situation that I call it let's type of systems to make the difference, to actually developed, but they developed as systems where hardly any businesses participate. Sometimes small businesses take part of it, but they're predominantly anywhere. They're time systems. There were some conflicts in the movement in Germany, in England, between these two lines of thinking, but actually it just worked as time systems. In Germany, we have over 200 Tauschrings. They are still the most prominent types of systems. If you look at Google News, for instance, but with the exception of one, and I know this quite well, all of them are time systems. And that's an important distinction. It's an important part of the history of complementary currencies, and which is sometimes forgotten. Yeah? We need to know where we come from in order to know where we want to go to.
Can I add some comments?
Yeah, Makoto?
On the points we are discussing. As to the community way, the Michael Linton, proposed was not good, I think, because as you said, the business takes, the let's community currency, and then they have no way to use it, so they accumulate it. But Michael Linton recommended that the business should, donate to the non-profit and so on.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really work. In my opinion, because LED system is very small in a local area, so it cannot include all the, productions, all the industrial sectors, so that everybody can, consume agriculture's products and services and so on. So, the LED system should be much wider if the business should be included. So that the economy should be reproducible. That's my opinion. And sorry, I want to explain another thing. You explained LEDs as debit and debt system, right?
Yeah.
But I don't think it's not appropriate, because if we say it's a debit and debt system, we can say it's a kind of IOU. But the debt system is not the IOU. I say it's a IO community. So the relationship is not between the individual and
Yes,
individual.
Right.
Right?
Right, I agree on this. I did not focus on the
So
left.
we should say it's a kind of IOC.
Yeah.
This is very important point.
Yes, that's
So if we say the rate is IOC, this is completely different from modern conventional money, paper money,
Yes.
and account money.
that's right.
That's the very unique point.
I
And
agree
you
on
said,
that. I did not focus on the LEDs. I just
Yeah.
took it and focused more on this
yeah,
scenario.
and you
I
said
had.
the rate is finite, right? Finite system, right?
Yes.
So with a boundary.
Yes,
I agree with you.
yes.
So
yes.
the boundary means the community. Community means a collection of people or a collection of corporation and so on.
Yes.
So the total community is the proper entity here. So the participant between community relationship is very important in REDS, but it is also very difficult to maintain.
That's important because
Okay.
it's always important to. There are many other variations of explaining boundaries, and that's interesting. This is just
That's my point.
That's
Yeah.
just an appetizer what I showed you, Andreas.
Sorry.
I just wanted to comment on this problem of the LEDs, of businesses accumulating high balances.
Yes.
Just wanted to comment that in Catalonia there is a LED that has found a kind of a solution for that. It is what they do is when business accepts social currency and accumulates a high balance, and at some point the business feels uncomfortable, then the merchant is allowed to stop accepting the social currency, and then it gives it, and then asks the consumers, the individuals that come to the shop,
Yeah.
to pay the price 100% in euros,
Yeah.
and the merchant will give back social currency
Yeah.
in exchange. In this
Yeah.
way, the business will still attract consumers and will reduce this positive balance. And then when it has reduced, then it can again start accepting the social currency again and accumulating.
It's possible to do this kind of thing, but I think the most important point for all complementary currencies is the question of how to overcome the problem of high transaction costs. And what we saw at the conference so far is always how to deal with issues like operation costs, management systems, costs of loss of credit. This has to be covered financially. And the third element is transaction costs. Yeah, it's sometimes in my small Tauschrank, I had a hairdresser, but the hairdresser was living in another part of the city. So in summertime, I took my bike to go there, but in wintertime, no, I went to the normal hairdresser. Yeah, that's transaction costs.
Yeah.
And that's, I published something about that a few years ago in the IGCCR. That's the most fundamental problem. And with the scenario I presented, at least there would be an answer to that. Yeah, you say you operate, that's the formula, operate within certain limits, and therefore you get lower tax rates. But that's of course nothing we can implement but we should think about it, and ultimately it means something which is a political demand, not just private initiatives. Yeah? I'm in favor also of these systems which are politically organized, also as systems where you have one systems in one region, and not just a number of various private currencies. One publicly administered and created system and covered a system is important to bring people together. In our societies, the big challenge is really that parts of the societies are drifting in completely different directions. And the concern I have is that this kind of a green movement we have now here, yeah, they form their little exchange systems, possibly have interconnections with other regions where they have overnight accommodation, but that's actually reinforcing social segmentation. Yes, please.
I have a question asking for a clarification.
Sorry.
A question asking for a clarification.
Yes.
When it was told before that the relationship is not between debitor and creditor, but between the node of the network and the community as a whole.
Yes.
What does it mean? The community is liable for the single debtor? Is it liable?
Yes. Yes.
In which way?
It means, in practice, it means, that's the best way, I think, to understand it. I worked for a small town bank in Germany, and then we looked at people, and some had suddenly vanished. They had left a debit, and of course, bad debts had to be written off. So they had to be carried by the community. And some of these...
They are sure.
Yes.
This must be Latin counseling system. So I owe you, but I do something to somebody.
Yes.
So my debit.
So there is a compensation,
Yeah,
cross
yeah.
compensation.
Cross compensation, yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. Perhaps one more question. The last one.
Thank you very much. I think I doubt if the too much emphasis on alternative is correct or not, because I think let's say it's too independent from the current system, so it's actually alternative. And I think complementary system can be more, in my opinion,
Yes.
can be more emphasis, because both of your scenario is basically it's based on the current currency, right?
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
one is public, it is compatible with the national currency, and the other is managed by if we have weak restriction with compatibility,
Yes.
it's organized by privately. So if the currency is independent from the current currency, it must be managed by the government, right?
Not managed by the government, but it should be a public structure. It could be a different structure. I wouldn't say managed by the government, no, but by bodies which operate. It could be cooperatives, something like that, but ruled within a public framework.
But if the circulation is complementary, like the national currency and the complementary currency is moved together,
Yes.
they are not need to be managed by some kind of public. They don't need the public national currencies backup.
Yeah. It's important if you think of these privileges. You have to also check that these privileges are not misused. Yeah, and therefore it would be necessary. I think it's also important to say that these alternatives have a counter-cyclical value. Regional currencies like the Chiemgauer have still small elements. They have restrictions on convertibility. You have to pay 5% as a business person to change it back. So there are some elements of this alternative economy thinking included in the system. Bristol Pound doesn't have that. one can think of alternatives, but the important point here is really to really make the difference and make the case that stricter rules of convertibility are important. Thank you very much.